Hello and welcome to another presidential episode of Say by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today is a guy who consistently reaches across the aisle to find bipartisan support, Mr. Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
That's a lie. Hi.
This month, we're going to be talking about presidential films. We got 4 presidential-themed films lined up for you. And it's a good mix, I think.
Yeah.
It mostly leans towards the comedy, but we got some other stuff in there. So I think we can just go straight in. We'll go in chronological order like we typically do. And we're going to start off with a comedy. This is 1993's Dave.
This summer, think funny, think hit, think Dave. It's Kevin Kline's funniest role since A Fish Called Wanda. Kevin Kline, Sigourney Weaver, Dave, an Ivan Reitman film, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, May 7th, at a theater near you.
This is directed by Ivan Reitman. I have a synopsis here. An uncanny presidential lookalike named Dave is recruited by the Secret Service to become a momentary stand-in for the President of the United States. Now, I think I did see Dave when I was very young, very, very young. I don't remember anything about it, honestly, so it was pretty much like this. I was going into this fresh. And the interesting thing about this lineup is that I cranked all of these out in, I guess it was 2 days. I guess I watched 2, and then the next day I watched another 2. And I don't know what it was, but I was just in the right headspace for these movies because I had a really good time with Dave. I enjoyed it very much, and I didn't really think I would, but yeah, I was just really into Kevin Kline's portrayal of this lookalike guy, and I was just really into it in general.
Yeah, it's a nice movie. It's hard, kind of hard to come up with too many things to say about it that aren't just variations on that general sentiment. I saw this movie for the first time last year, actually, and that's just kind of what I came away thinking. It's a movie that can make you feel good, but doesn't have kind of a vaguely unsavory aftertaste because it doesn't really get in too much to any particular like ideological 90s triangulation isms towards politics like we might see at some point later this month.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a very inoffensive, just nice, feel-good movie that you just kind of, you let it wash over you. You have a couple chuckles here and there. I mean, if I were to have, like, I guess a criticism, it's not funny. Like, it's a comedy, but I didn't think it was funny at all. I found it to be extremely entertaining, but there weren't really any kind of, like, laugh-out-loud moments or anything. But I liked the central cast here. I mentioned Kevin Kline, and I thought Sigourney Weaver was fantastic in it. She plays the First Lady. And then Frank Langella is sort of the bad guy in a lot of ways.
I would say yeah. I don't think you need to qualify. He's the villain of this.
Yeah. Kevin Dunn, who I feel like this is like maybe the start of this like role for him, because I feel like this is kind of the role that he played in Veep too, and he's great in this. And Charles Grodin too, who plays Kevin Kline's Dave's friend, who's an accountant, in one of the most ridiculous scenes in the movie where the two of them sit down and look at the entire budget of the United States over one evening and figure out how to save $650 million.
It's a great scene. Over bratwurst and hot mustard, I believe. Is the dinner.
Yep. Yeah, so it's just it's a very light, kind of just fun movie. I think that it's probably not Reitman's best film, but it's certainly not, not his worst either.
I mean, it's the kind of movie where you look at the direct crew, look at the credits on it, and you're kind of surprised that it's sort of a big name director.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how else to phrase that, but it's like this doesn't feel like a movie where you look at it and it's like it feels like it fits into someone's big career narrative. It feels like just kind of a movie that is and could kind of be like I said, yeah, it just doesn't really, you don't think of this and really think this fits somewhere in like a well-defined narrative of someone's career as a filmmaker, but it doesn't have to. It's a nice movie.
Yeah. And when you look at this compared to Reitman's filmography, especially, you know, around this time, he did Junior right after this. Right before this, he did Kindergarten Cop. So it kind of fits, I think, within there. And of course, he did Twins before that even. So yeah, I think I don't know. I guess it kind of fits within Reitman's film, but I think that Ivan Reitman was always kind of a hard director to sort of pin down. I think that he's. You can definitely see like the similarities between his movies when you look at it on a list, but if you're just like watching one of his movies and you don't already know that it's one of his, I think it'd be hard to be like, oh, this is definitely a Reitman film.
Yeah. I think that's maybe what I was trying to get at is that it's a movie that doesn't really have a signature to it.
Correct. Yeah, like as far as like the style, cinematography, camera work, production design, it's all like just fairly standard 90s stuff across the board. Like nothing about this like sticks out visually or stylistically. It's just you know, I think in this case the lens is just a vehicle for the story and not much more, and that's fine. You know, it's an okay story. I had fun with it. I was definitely like I said, in the right headspace for this movie.
Yeah,
and the other ones that we're going to talk about. So yeah, I enjoyed Dave quite a bit. I'd give it like a light recommend.
Yeah. Another thing that I want to bring up is that the Oval Office set that they built for this movie was there was actually a New York Times article about depicting the Oval Office in movies, and it was written it's an article from I think 1997, and this one was used a bunch through the following few years because there was just this, as the article posits, this sudden glut of movies that wanted to be about the presidency and be set in the White House. I don't know if there were more than there were in the 80s, but
I think there had to be, man.
You would have to think so.
I mean, these are only 4 that we're talking about. There were many more, and
definitely,
and even ones that aren't specifically like presidential, like political movies. There's still a lot of movies that take place, you know, in the Oval Office, have scenes in there like Mars Attacks or something.
Yeah. And what's the thing is that when they used the interesting thing about it is that when they shot The American President, which we'll talk about in a bit, there was actually a second Oval Office set built for it. So by 97, when they wrote this article, they could basically have 2 Oval Office sets that 2 productions could use at the same time, which was apparently necessary since there were so many.
That's funny. I mean, they both looked good.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use that to transition it into The American President. This one came out in 1995.
Listen, are you hungry? I skipped breakfast. You wanna have a donut?
Andrew Shepard is about to go where no American president has gone before.
The president can't just go out on a date.
I'm having dinner at the White House.
I'm having lunch at the Kremlin.
Dig it, Miss Wade. You're the president's girlfriend.
Michael Douglas and Annette Bening in a Rob Reiner film, The American President, rated PG-13. Special sneak preview Saturday, November 11th.
And it's directed by Rob Reiner, written by Aaron Sorkin. which is very clear. Now, like,
it is so clear.
Like when you talk about like a director's style, sometimes that's not immediately obvious, but a lot of times when you're watching something that's written by Aaron Sorkin, it is, and this is the case here. I mean, this, fans of The West Wing, I think, like this has that DNA in it. I mean, not only are like a lot of the same actors used, but the kind of walk and talks and like just it's all here, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. This is, I think, in every sense, you have to assume this is just a practice run for The West Wing, basically. And you know what? We can get to the finer points of what this movie is trying to do when it actually depicts the business of politicking as president, but that's really not the point here. This is, again, I think I can repeat the general sentiment about Dave. This is just a nice movie that you can just have on.
Yeah. Now, the thing about this one is I just rewatched this like a year ago because my wife wanted to rewatch it. And so I was like in the room, I was like half paying attention to it. So when you suggested this, I was just like, oh, God, because I knew that I was going to have to watch it again because I didn't pick up enough on that initial rewatch to like really retain all of the details. So I was kind of not looking forward to this one, but I got to say, again, I had a really good time with this. Like you said, with Dave, in a similar manner, I just found it to be very enjoyable. It's a nice little, romance movie about this widowed president. Did I read the synopsis?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Let me read the synopsis. Maybe that can do it better than me. A widowed U.S. president running for re-election and an environmental lobbyist fall in love. It's all above board, but politics is perception, and sparks fly anyway. There we go. So this stars Michael Douglas and Annette Bening. Ton of other people in here as well, including Martin Sheen, Michael J. Fox, David Paymer, Richard Dreyfuss. There are a bunch of people. Great cast.
Anna Devere Smith, who is also in Dave.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so this is it's again pretty light. There's a little bit more kind of scandalous type stuff that happens in this one as far as the politics angle, where, like the synopsis says, it's an election year. This is a president who is single and he starts dating this woman, and of course the opposition is like trying to dig up dirt on her and turn it into a scandalous thing, and the president, this very altruistic president, is just trying to keep the focus on the important issues at hand. And of course that this whole situation causes a bit of a rift between them and their budding relationship, but at the same time it really, the conflict here, it's not super, it's not big. It's not like there's something.
No,
it's not like their relationship gets put into jeopardy and they sort of break up. It's like they have a little bit of an issue, but it's like they're adults. They work it out, and I found that to be pretty nice too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's as far as these things can go, as far as movies about where one of the characters is the president of the United States can go, this is a relatively conflict-free movie. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons is why is because this has like a super Aaron Sorkin ending, which is that the president gives one speech and it fixes every single problem at once.
Yep.
Which I think is a fine thing to think about, but as I might have alluded to earlier, and as I really alluded to at the very start of this podcast. I think it's the kind of thing that also got into The West Wing, and also a lot of otherwise well-intentioned people took completely the wrong takeaway on how to compartmentalize that, and real-world politics to an extent paid a very dear price for it.
I never got into The West Wing. I don't know. I remember like when it first came out, I watched I think a few episodes, but I never got into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfectly good enough show to watch.
And I like Aaron Sorkin's stuff for the most part. I feel like when he's like kind of reining it in, I think that's when, and he needs to stay away from courts, like court scenes is.
Yeah,
because that's when it gets.
Yeah, I was about to say, if we're concerned about someone reining Aaron Sorkin in, the fact that he now appears to direct all of his scripts from now, and I guess for the indefinite future, means that he is not going to rein it in ever again.
No, it's going to be a million times worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the case study there is the trial of the Chicago 7.
Yeah,
which is Aaron Sorkin directing, Aaron Sorkin writing courtroom scenes. Oh, it's rough.
Yeah.
It's not a bad movie. It's
no,
just that,
I didn't mind that movie, but the courtroom scenes were pretty ridiculous, especially towards the end.
It literally ends. I don't know. Should I spoil the end of the trial of Chicago 7? It's also, if you know Aaron Sorkin, then you know this is not a spoiler, that the last scene of the trial of Chicago 7 is someone giving a really big speech and then everyone in this courtroom spontaneously applauding.
Yeah.
And it's like, I like, it's nice to think that like the speech is going to fix things, but also even for the American president, like this was, consider that the era of politics, this was like post, the 94 midterms and the contract with America and stuff. And it's like, and like the era of like right-wing talk radio, it's like nice to think that you could give a speech and bring everybody back together, but things were really going way off the rails by this point. And you could not bring, you could not bring a speech to what was going on by that point. And too many people thought so for too long, and that's all I'll say about that.
I think that there was opportunity for an interesting dynamic here, because you have the whole like Annette Bening's character she's a regular person for the most part. I mean, she still has a pretty high power job, I would say, but she comes into this whole White House thing, dating the president, and just like seeing how crazy it is to be the president and all the craziness. And, we're witnessing that with her and learning about all these crazy, like just the amount of power he has and like all the things that he has at his fingertips. But then there's also this aspect where he's a single dad. So he has a teenage daughter, and I feel like there could have been an opportunity there to have Annette Bening's character, bond with, I think her name was Lucy, bond with her a little bit more. But in this movie, almost every scene, it's just her playing the trombone. Like every scene, she's just playing the trombone. Like, what is she, like, perpetually practicing the trombone? And at one point, she seems to get worse at it. So it's like, what is going on here? Like, it felt like Sorkin had no idea how to write a teenage girl character. So he's just like, just have her practice the trombone all the time.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, what the curriculum is like in these, upper end DC private schools where the children of presidents go, but apparently it's just only band concerts all the time.
Yeah. But overall, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I would say that if you don't like Aaron Sorkin style scripts, then you're definitely not going to like this one, because this is like, high octane Sorkin.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't
but, you know.
I feel like some of his other like earlier things were a little bit crazier. Like Sports Night, I remember that one, like that show being absolutely wild at how fast it was. And of course, The Social Network is famously like moves very quickly.
The one bit of Sorkin ephemera I do think about sometimes is I have not seen very much of Studio 60, his short-lived network drama in like the mid-2000s. That was basically about a show that is just, SNL.
Yep, I remember.
Except I've seen the teaser for the pilot, which is like 10 minutes long.
The funny thing about Studio 60 was that it came out the same year, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it came out the same year as 30 Rock. And
yes.
It was like so confusing because you had two shows that were about making shows, and it felt so like it was on the same network too. So it was like, it was so weird. But Studio 60 obviously just didn't. That one didn't work.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the pilot for Studio 60. The teaser ends with Judd Hirsch playing the executive producer of like an SNL style sketch show, and he goes on this extended rant, like on air, completely unscripted, and they have to pull him off the air and fire him. And it's just so yeah, it basically has the network moment, like, in the movie Network, and I think it's referenced a bunch in the script too, in the show. So yeah, I think in a strange way that I haven't seen too much of that show because it's not really available outside of that, or at least I didn't think it was outside of that teaser. And it's like, for some reason, I kept thinking about that as like, this is peak Sorkin somehow.
Yeah,
because it's just
probably
a bunch of people moving back and forth this big space, and then it ends with someone making an enormous speech.
I think The Newsroom is also like, that one is very, very, very Sorkin. Almost every episode was like a big speech.
I believe that the Newsroom also begins with someone making a huge speech in the teaser first in the pilot.
Yep, Jeff Daniels. He has this like moment on air, and it like kicks off everything on the show. And I mean, it's a good show. I liked The Newsroom quite a bit, actually. I liked that one of the interesting things about that show was that it used like current events, like actual topics. So it was sort of like fresh, and real world events that were happening were reflected on the show, and I thought that was kind of cool.
I guess by comparison, The West Wing seems really low key, because I think the first episode of The West Wing is that they have to deal with the minor embarrassment that the president fell off his bicycle. I think that's the first episode. Like, that's the main thing in the first episode that brings the characters together, is that he's not hurt in any, he's not hurt or anything. It's just that the president fell off a bike. No, wait, there is a big speech at the end.
Of course there is.
But it's at the end, not the beginning.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I believe, the big speech at the end is that Bartlett delivers a big rant tearing down some, right-wing Christian fundamentalists, and that's what, embarrasses them and shuts them up. And it's like, it's nice to think that that's how that would work, but again, we're in Aaron Sorkin land here. And as long as we don't, get too many ideas about its applicability to reality, then I think we would be fine with it, but... Yeah, so there you have it. If you're into that Aaron Sorkin style and you haven't seen The American President, definitely check it out. It's worth a look, I would say. Despite everything I've said, I think it's nice.
Yeah, it's a nice one. I want to see Malice. That's been on my list forever. I've never seen Malice, which was so The American President was Sorkin's third screenplay. Malice was his second. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, people don't really talk about Malice. I think just because it's kind of sandwiched between A Few Good Men and The American President.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we're going to be looking at a comedy from Michael Moore. So this one's written and directed by Michael Moore. Canadian Bacon is the title here. I have a synopsis. The U.S. president, low in the opinion polls, gets talked into raising his popularity by trying to start a Cold War against Canada. This stars John Candy, Alan Alda, Rhea Perlman, Kevin Pollak, Rip Torn. This one, I've never seen this before, so this was a first time watch for me, and I'm a little bit torn with this one because it is not a very good movie at all.
No,
it is not. It's straight up bad. It's very.
You might even say it's bad. Yes,
it's very messy. It's too goofy for its own good. A lot of the jokes are just way too on the nose. Like the nonstop racial jokes in this are like,
oh yeah, it's
like they're not.
Pretty rough.
It's not like it's racist or anything like that.
No,
like,
but it's,
and some of them are funny. But there's so many of them that you can't help but notice, like, okay, I get it. Like, I understand. Let's move on past the racial jokes.
And the reason that they can become uncomfortable is because, like the rest of the jokes in this movie, it's very blunt, and you can't do that with some of the material that Moore's doing here.
Yeah, it's just not.
It's
really unfortunate because I think that there are individual scenes in this that I think are quite funny. I think there are certain scenes that do work, but by and large, it is just so freaking messy. Like. Mm-hmm. The pacing, the just random sequences, it just, none of it particularly works. And a lot of it is just too stupid to be funny, really. Mm-hmm. It almost plays like a spoof. It almost plays like some kind of goof spoof, but not. But it doesn't go. But if that's what it's trying to be, it doesn't go far enough. Like, it's trying to be like smart satire, but it doesn't work. It's dumb satire.
Yeah, it really doesn't know how it wants to approach this material, and so nothing really works.
No, which is a shame because this is John Candy's final film. It was the final film that was released. Mm-hmm. The one scene, and I, by the way, I love John Candy. I think that he was an American treasure, and
he was Canadian.
Yeah, he was a North American treasure.
It's a continental treasure.
And just it's so tragic that we lost him so young, and I was reading about while I was watching this movie, being, bored and sad that it was so unenjoyable. I was looking at the Wikipedia page for John Candy, and I read that he was in talks to. There were 3 roles that he was attached to. One being an adaptation of A Confederacy of Dunces. The second being an adaptation of Mordecai Richler's The Incomparable Atuk, and the third being a biopic on Fatty Arbuckle. And unfortunately, he passed away, not being able to film those roles. But crazily, John Belushi, Sam Kinison, and Chris Farley were each attached to all 3 of those roles, and they all passed away before being able to do them. How crazy is that?
Yeah, that's bizarre. I mean, I knew that there was this feel. I knew that there was always this feeling about A Confederacy of Dunces, that there were so many efforts to adapt it and none of them ever. So that there was this feeling that there was some kind of proverbial curse around trying to turn that book into a movie, but I didn't know that full fact, and that's bizarre.
Yeah, and not one of those movies has been made. So that's kind of wild. So this was the last movie that was released starring him. John Candy was filming Wagons East when he passed away. And I remember that they reading that they finished that movie using a stunt double, and it's that movie's really bad, really
I haven't
bad.
seen it.
It's really bad. It's him and Matthew Perry, if I remember correctly, and it's a Western comedy. The only scene that I really remember vividly is a scene where they are like, instead of circling the wagons, they square the wagons. And I remember that scene being really funny. But otherwise, sort of like Canadian Bacon, Wagons East was not very good. There's one really funny scene or at least I thought it was funny, in Canadian Bacon when they're heading to, so Rhea Perlman's character, she gets arrested by the Canadian government because she was littering in Canada, and they're going to rescue her. John Candy and it's John Candy, Kevin J. O'Connor, and Bill Nunn, and they're driving. They're on a road trip to save her, and they get pulled over by a cop played by Dan Aykroyd, and they get fined because they had graffiti on their truck that was like "Death to Canada" and stuff like that. We hate Canada. And they got fined because they didn't have the graffiti in French also. And where the fine was either 1,000 Canadian dollars or 10 US dollars. And for whatever reason, I thought that was really funny. And then also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I was going to agree that there are pockets of this movie where it is working, where this specific brand of comedy kind of pays off. It's just very rare.
Yeah, and I think that also there needs to be some kind of connective tissue to the jokes. Like, a lot of the jokes are like cultural jokes or political jokes, and you need a vessel to carry those things. You can't just have these like seemingly separate jokes about Canada or like the state of modern day politics and have that carry a movie. Like, you need a decent plot, and the plot here is it's just so random and none of it makes any kind of logical sense.
Yeah, I mean, we're never unaware of the point that Michael Moore is trying to make here, which is that, the feeling that after the Cold War that there needed to be there was this desire to create a new enemy for that the entire country could rally against for political advantage in kind of a prolonged Cold War. And we're never far away from that point because it's like restated every third scene.
Yeah.
Alan Alda is the president, though. I always like.
I love Alan Alda. I think he plays a good president in this.
Yeah,
does a good job. I also like the scene when again they're still going to rescue Rhea Perlman's character, and there's this like giant crowd around what's that that tower in Canada called in Toronto?
Yep,
the Toronto one,
the CN tower. Yeah,
Canadian. That and they're just shoving everybody out, like violently shoving everybody out of the way. And as the people are like falling and tumbling down the hill, they're all apologizing to John Candy as he's shoving them out of the way. And I thought that was funny. That was a funny scene.
There's an interesting degree to which, kind of as a comedy device, that Moore is kind of making fun of sort of the stereotypes of Americans who, I guess by and large, Canada doesn't really feature. I was thinking about this recently. Like Canada doesn't really feature much in the American conception of like countries that really kind of figure into the thoughts as much as you would expect it to for a country that shares such a massive land border. It feels like if turmoil's happening in, say, Britain, as it has been recently, that's really well followed. But I feel like comparable events, when they do occur in Canadian politics, aren't covered as much in the United States.
No, absolutely not. I mean,
it's this paradox, and
yeah, like I think we just it's as Americans, I think Americans just like to make fun of Canada, like they're. And not necessarily in a mean-spirited way, although I'm sure that some people do that. Like the Canadian jokes, and there are plenty in this movie. There's so many Canadian jokes.
The thing is that Moore kind of wants to comment on these perceptions. There's the straightforward political satire. That they are able to scare Americans by mentioning that Canada has universal health care and things like that. But then there's also oh, Michael Moore is now just doing 10 minutes of like played directly straight Canadian stereotype jokes.
Yeah, he does. He definitely does that. Like there's Mountie jokes in here. Stephen Wright plays a Mountie. There's a lot of a boot, how they say a boot. Like they're all here. Like you have the checklist of Canadian stereotypes. They're all represented here. Now, back in '95, I don't know how pervasive they were. Maybe Canadian jokes or the stereotypes are maybe this movie helped cement those stereotypes. I don't know, but I don't think so. Actually, like thinking about,
I think they would have to be.
Thinking about like old SCTV sketches and stuff, I feel like those were probably already pretty prominent.
I think it's another example of how Moore kind of tries to have it both ways and how he's approaching the comedy, or whether it's just really broad comedy or just more targeted satire, and he tries to make them coexist at the same time, and it just doesn't really work.
Yeah, and I think that his tone is often a little bit misguided too. There's some scenes where you're just like, that's playing a little. It's getting a little bit dark, and then like they kind of play it off for goofs, and it's like, I don't know about all that. Also, there's like a scene where the one guy, Kevin J. O'Connor's character, Roy Boy, shoots a rocket at the president, and
that's really early too.
It's like, first of all,
the second scene.
So first he tries to kill himself by jumping into Niagara Falls, and he fails.
That's the first scene.
And then there's this whole joke about how like this plant shut down, and John Candy and Rhea Perlman are they're police officers. Candy's the sheriff, Rhea Perlman's like a deputy, and their current job is to fish out bodies from the bottom of the falls, and they get paid $50 per body or whatever.
Yeah, the problem is they don't get paid as much if they save someone about to jump, because so many of the former employees are trying to take their own lives because the plant's closed down. And the joke there is that they actually want them to die, because the way the scheme worked is that they get paid more to retrieve a body rather than to save someone.
Yeah, so the whole time, like, what happens is that the Roy Boy is like dangling on the side, and they're trying to like get him to jump, and then Rhea Perlman shoots him.
Yes,
she shoots him, and that's just
that's the next first scene of the movie.
The next scene, it's completely forgotten. The fact that he's shot, he doesn't seek medical attention or anything. It's just forgotten, and then he buys a rocket launcher and shoots a rocket at the president.
Yeah, because the next scene is they're auctioning off all the surplus military equipment from the factory, and he shoots the rocket at the president. Also forgotten as quickly as it began. Oh, then they do have that bit where it's in the White House and they tell the president that like his approval rating went up and the stocks rallied after the assassination, but then they all came back down when they found out that he had survived it.
Yeah. There's also a really funny scene with Jim Belushi, who plays a news reporter, and there's just this one, it's just a little kind of almost a throwaway thing where before he does his report, he like gives this like very solemn apology, and he doesn't say like what it's for or anything. You know, it's something like really awful and
it
scandalous.
Sounded like he was like it sounded like he like committed some kind of violent crime because he had to like apologize to the people that were like injured or something.
Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't sure if like maybe he exposed himself to people or something, but either way, that was really funny too. Just the fact that was just thrown in there.
Yeah, it begins with a really solemn public apology, and then it goes straight into the.
Yeah. I liked that. So I think that there's like fun, like individual segments of this, but I think the overall package is not funny, not very good, not very well put together. Michael Moore just is not my kind of comedian, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's telling that we're just describing the individual bits that we liked, just because you can kind of pull them out individually and then separate them. Yeah, I understand why he did not make more narrative films.
Thankfully.
I want to mention another thing that I liked, which is literally, I was thinking about how this might have come together. At the very end, like throughout the movie, there are occasional phone calls that the president has with the Canadian prime minister. And it's just like, you can only hear the voice muffled over the end of the line. It's kind of like the adult's voice in like the Peanuts cartoons. And then at the very end, it's not even like it's not even like a scene or a line. It's just a still image cameo, basically. From, I'll just say, I almost don't want to give away the element of surprise about who plays the Canadian Prime Minister, but it is perfect. Then again, I am suggesting that you should watch this movie for the last image of it. So I don't know if that's actually true either.
We can just say it's Wallace Shawn.
It's Wallace Shawn.
Yeah.
Wallace Shawn appears in this movie. You can't even say one scene. Wallace Shawn appears in this movie for one still image.
I think that's pretty funny too.
Yeah, and I liked that.
There's certain things. I also thought it was kind of, again, like kind of going with like how things were not quite the right tone all the time. Rip Torn's character at the end, when they're like wrapping everything up and saying what everybody did, they were just like, he killed himself.
Yeah, see, he plays this super hawkish general who I believe the joke is he kills himself after finding out that Hogan's Heroes wasn't real.
Yeah, which is like the stupidest.
Yeah, which is God. Like sandwiched in between jokes about how like the president becomes like a drive time radio host after he loses the next election to Oliver North.
Yeah.
Yeah, weirdly enough, in that last sequence of jokes, you get the entire problem with the movie trying to find a balance for its humor all there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would just go ahead and stick with some of Candy's earlier roles. Just rewatch Uncle Buck or Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I mean, Thanksgiving is coming up, so Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Check that out. I guess Thanksgiving will have passed by the time this comes out, probably. But either way,
yeah. Final fact I'll point out before we move on is that Canadian Bacon was released in the United States on September 22nd, 1995. Which, if I looked up that weekend, that is the same weekend that another film discussed on the show was released. Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls.
Nice. Very nice.
A fascinating weekend in
what a great weekend.
1995 films.
What are you going to go see this weekend? Showgirls which probably wasn't even playing in your theater because it was NC-17 and it didn't get released in many theaters.
Or
Canadian Bacon.
Or Canadian Bacon, which was released in, it looks like 14 theaters.
Oh, God. Our final film this month is we're deviating a little bit. We're going from a comedy to an action flick. This came out in 1997, Air Force One.
I'm the President of the United States.
On July 25th.
How the hell did they get Air Force One?
Experience the motion picture event of the summer. Harrison Ford.
Get off my plane.
Air Force One, rated R. Opens everywhere Friday.
It's equally as absurd.
Yeah, maybe more so in some ways. This is directed by Wolfgang Peterson. I have a synopsis here. Communist radicals hijack Air Force One with the U.S. president and his family on board. The vice president negotiates from Washington, D.C., while the president, a veteran, fights to rescue the hostages on board. All right. If you're not familiar with this one, it stars Harrison Ford, Gary Oldman, Glenn Close. So this is an action classic here. This one was an instant classic when it came out. I'm not sure why, looking back on it. I mean, all this is Die Hard and with Harrison Ford in a plane. That's all this is.
Yeah, but isn't that a great
I guess
idea
it's enough.
in and of itself?
Yeah, I guess after saying it out loud, I realized, you know what? That's enough.
Harrison Ford's the president, and he's on Air Force One, and it's Die Hard.
Yeah, and you have Gary Oldman as the big bad guy. Perfect.
I'm actually betting, it's one of those movies where even if you haven't seen it, you've basically seen it just because of how it's saturated in the culture. Once we say, and Gary Oldman as the main antagonist, I think one specific moment in the film comes into your head instantaneously, and it's the same one for everybody.
Oh, yeah. Get off my plane.
Yes.
That, I mean, that is definitely that one of those scenes, one of those super iconic scenes.
That just might be the first thing that comes into your head once this movie is mentioned at all.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Absolutely. It's such a famous scene. I can't remember. I feel like it was probably in the trailer, too. Because it was just such a big moment. And it's a great scene. What you don't think about, if you haven't seen this movie in a long time, or maybe you haven't seen it at all, you just saw that one scene. What you don't really, what you need to think about is the scene after that when the plane is crashing and the plane crashes and it is the most ridiculous 90s CG plane I have ever seen in my life.
There's all of the CGI in this movie.
Oh my God, dude. It is like some of the worst, like the way it looks like it's a PlayStation 1 game. The way that the plane hits the ocean and then breaks apart and then flips. It looks so bad. It's hilarious.
To
be clear, it doesn't take anything away from the film. I still had an absolute blast with it.
There are these pockets of this movie where there's just 1997 CGI, and even by the standards of this point, not good CGI for the standards of a major studio.
Absolutely not.
And it's awful.
Yeah, there's a lot of green screen work that's happening here, or probably blue screen back then, and it the compositing is so bad. Like nobody's keyed correctly, so you can see that outline around everybody. Mm-hmm. So it's so painfully obvious that everything is being done in front of a screen. It's very rough.
There's this scene where a bunch of the hostages aboard the plane are able to, that's when they're able to get parachutes and escape.
Yeah.
And there's it's a minute of them parachuting out of the plane, and it's wow.
it's pretty silly to see them jumping out of this plane.
Yeah,
I mean, there's even some like things that movies have mastered by this point. Like, there's a scene, just a basic scene where it's even before the president gets on the plane. He's just in like his limo and he's like talking to his aides and stuff. The outside, like as they're driving, because for some reason, I guess like this limo's doesn't have tinted windows or something, so you can see perfectly outside, but it is so plainly a screen. It's almost like like in Kill Bill or something, when like they make it very apparent that this is not a real car and they're not really driving. Like, that's what this looked like. It's just all of the effects work, even like basic things are so bad. And maybe it's because it was in HD, maybe like back then when it came out and it wasn't in HD, it didn't look as apparent. Because that definitely happens sometimes where, you when a movie transitions over to HD and it's just like, oof.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford is the president of the United States. Air Force One.
I think that's just the tagline, isn't it? Like, that's such a great tagline.
Yeah, Harrison Ford is the president of the United States.
That gets them in.
Yeah, this movie is extremely fun. I very much enjoy this movie, even with all its flaws. I mean, I guess back when I saw this when I was a kid, it just like the extreme cheesiness was kind of lost on me as a kid. Mm-hmm. But, revisiting it as an adult, you just see how ridiculous it is. But in a lot of ways, that makes it more fun. And it's funny, too, because, like, I rewatched Outbreak a couple years. It was, like, during the pandemic, I watched Outbreak. And I kind of forgot how ridiculous that movie was. Because I always kind of remember that movie being... Like, in my head, I was thinking that it was more similar to, was it Contagion? Was the Steven...
Contagion, are you thinking? Yeah.
I was thinking in my head, like, in my memories, like, it was closer to that. But then when you see Outbreak, now you realize that it's like a disaster film. Like, it's so ridiculous.
And I think when we watched that for our... March 2020 episode, like, it seemed very daunting to go into it, considering that that was like right at the start of the pandemic in the United States when everything was closing down, and but watching it, it's like it is just such a, like you say, it's such a caricature, like cartoonish disaster movie that it was, for me and I as well, kind of surprisingly easy to watch, even given the circumstances.
Right, exactly. And I think, so Wolfgang Petersen did Air Force One directly after Outbreak, and yeah, it felt kind of the same, where it was just so over the top and just silly. The scene when he's trying to wire to cut the wires and empty the fuel, and he's like, the whole red, white, and blue line, so silly. And then there's a scene where the plane gets shot up, and they have like an escort at this point. So they have like F-15s or whatever escorting them. And at one point, one of the pilots just goes, "Sorry, sir, you can't land." And they just accepted the fact that they're not going to be able to land the plane. And it's like, why? The plane is flying. Like, it's in the air flying. Why wouldn't you be able to land it? It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why you can't land this plane. Because it's flying. Like, if it can fly, why can't it land? It's not like the landing gear was gone. But it's just it adds this, like, they had to keep raising the stakes. Like, things had to get more and more intense So they were just like, you can't land the plane. Sorry.
In the classic, action movie tradition, this movie ends about 7 times before it actually does.
Yeah. I also like how there was that one, the one Secret Service guy who was like, he was a traitor and he was working with the terrorists.
Yeah. What interesting fact I discovered about this, because I think if people were trying to, read, I guess, the politics of this movie, it would be easy to assume it was very kind of like a sort of a hawkish, nationalistic movie. But there's an interesting fact that I came across for this, that is that in the script, and apparently they also shot a scene where it's explained why Gibbs, the name of that agent, ends up is helping the terrorists, which is because he's like a former CIA guy who resents that the Cold War ended, because it meant that he couldn't keep along that line of work. And so it's like he just completely just falls apart because because the Cold War is not happening anymore. And I guess he kind of wants to just restart conflict in that sort of way. But they cut the scene out because it doesn't actually matter at that point in the movie why he's doing that. But if you keep it in, then it kind of changes how, if someone was trying to read the movie's politics, how they would, because then it basically becomes Canadian bacon.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, what is it, Canadian bacon?
It no longer seems like,
trying to manufacture a war.
Yeah, it basically becomes like the exact same brand of satire that Canadian Bacon is, instead of this kind of movie that you could read as, I don't know, some kind of jingoistic action movie. But I just love that fact so much, because coming right after Canadian Bacon, it's like, oh, that would just be the same movie then.
It's so funny. Man, they should have left that in. I think that would have been...
Yeah, I mean, I understand why they cut it, because by then you don't care. You never cared.
No, you don't care. I think, wasn't it both Canadian Bacon and this one that involved Kazakhstan also? I know that there were two, this one and another one that we talked about.
This one has Kazakhstan. I don't know if Canadian Bacon does.
I think it does, because I remember noting, because I watched these two back to back, and I remember making a mental note of the Kazakhstan angle. I think that both of them involved Kazakhstan. So really, I mean, in a lot of ways, Air Force One was just ripping off Canadian Bacon all over the place.
I remember now. Yeah. You're right. These are kind of the same movie.
You just swap out Harrison Ford with John Candy, and then, I guess Alan Alda would be...
Alan Alda?
Yeah, that would be the appropriate one. I guess maybe you could have, like, William H. Macy and John Candy be interchangeable characters.
Yeah, there's kind of a synergy between their characters. I think this is a perfect observation to make for this episode.
Air Force One is a remake of Canadian Bacon.
I mean, if they had kept that explanation in, I don't see how we could have read it any other way.
I don't know. I guess who's Rhea Perlman in this scenario? I don't know. Yeah, Glenn Close plays the vice president. She does a good job. I like her in that role. That was a good choice.
There's also, we have this movie directed by Wolfgang Petersen, who died earlier this year. There's also a brief appearance from Philip Baker Hall, who also died this year as one of the cabinet members. There's that whole discussion in the movie where the cabinet wants Glenn Close's character as the vice president to invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment and assume the presidency on an acting basis, because for a while the question is even if the president is alive or not, because he's not in the escape hatch that they send for him, because we find out that he's still on the plane. And it's treated, I think, as this ridiculous idea, but actually I think it's a perfectly reasonable option to consider it in this scenario.
Yeah, they make.
It turned out not necessary, but
yeah, they make a big deal about it, and I think there's like a scene where they show her like tearing it up at the end.
Yeah. But no, it was not. I don't think it's itself a bad idea.
No, I mean you gotta prepare. You gotta be ready.
Yeah, especially because they didn't know where the president was for a large portion of it, which is kind of like a case study for circumstances where the 25th Amendment would be applicable.
I do like the scene when he gets a cell phone, and there's like a manual. He has to like look up the instruction manual on how to use the cell phone.
Also, some synergy with the American president there, because he has to talk to someone on the other end of the phone who does not believe that he is the president.
Yeah.
Which is also a big thing in the American president when Michael Douglas tries to buy flowers, call a florist.
Yep.
Yeah, all these movies are the same, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. They're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Man, so Wolfgang Petersen passed away this year. Ivan Reitman passed away this year also. This is there's another theme emerging.
Yeah.
Here with this this month, a much sadder theme.
Yeah. I'm looking at Wolfgang Petersen's filmography again. Also on there is In the Line of Fire, which I guess also would have qualified for this month. It's about a president.
We had talked about when you came up with this idea. The thing that I wanted to talk about was Bulworth, but then you
running for president.
You reminded me that he was a senator, not a president, which bummed me out. I wanted to talk about Bulworth.
But it's not as if there was a deficit of movies, like we said earlier, about presidents in the 90s to talk about, which kind of makes me wonder, like, what was the impetus behind the glut of movies about presidents in the 90s?
I don't know.
They needed 2 Oval Office sets.
There were quite a lot. There was and then there were like Dick came out from 1999. Wag the Dog, was there a presidential aspect to that? I mean,
yeah, it's about the presidency. I don't know if the president features in it though.
Yeah,
it might be one of those ones where he's just never seen.
Yeah.
Weirdly, that was one of the initial ideas for The West Wing. Not to return to that for a minute, but was that I believe initially they were not going to. The president was not actually going to feature in the show at all, which is impossible to imagine.
That it takes place in the West
Wing. For the listeners who have seen any of The West Wing at all.
Yeah. And then, of course, there was Primary Colors. There was My Fellow Americans. Another Nixon movie came out that was called Nixon. I think that was that a Ron Howard one?
I think that was Oliver Stone.
Oh, Oliver Stone. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because he made that after he made JFK.
JFK, yeah.
I almost suggested that, but then I thought we could kind of do with like fictional presidents. We could just do 4 movies about fictional presidents. But I was thinking we do a couple of other movies about presidents, and then we just do 3 movies and just talk about like JFK or something, because that's like 3.5 hours long.
Oh God, yeah. Well, that was another kind of there was a little bit of a gag in Dave with Oliver Stone, who played a little cameo, and he was trying to say that he thought that the person was not the president, and nobody believed him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there was The War Room, the big, which was the documentary about the election. There's so many.
Yeah, I mean, I have no theory about why. But I'm going to say I was trying to come up with something. Maybe there's something about as comes up so much in these movies, the end of the Cold War or something.
Maybe.
I know there's a podcast. I haven't listened to too many episodes of it, but Jamel Bowie and John Gans do a podcast that's just about like post Cold War thrillers, and maybe and comment on presumably just discuss that subject, because it seems like you couldn't you couldn't watch too many movies in the 90s without coming up with one about the president or about somehow relating towards the end of the Cold War in either an explicit narrative sense or kind of the underpinnings of some of these movies.
Yeah. And you even have like the kids movies, the Disney movies getting in on it with like First Kid starring Sinbad.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a movie called First Daughter. Not familiar with that. There was Shadow Conspiracy from 1997. Deterrence. Executive Power from 1997. We'd already mentioned JFK. I mean, so many. Like, it was ridiculous. Did I mention My Fellow Americans? Cause
yes, you did.
Okay. Because that's an important one.
Yeah. It's just the
fact that I'm looking here, I just did a search for it, and the fact that there is a website that has top 10 90s movies about American presidents. You can formulate a top 10.
Yeah.
Absolute Power. This one has Independence Day. I guess you could say.
I mean, yeah. I believe in the article they mentioned that Independence Day was, I think, they used the Oval Office set they used for this was, I think, the American President's Oval Office set. They like talk about which ones use the American President set and which ones use the Dave set.
Well, according to Retropond.com, the number one presidential movie of the 90s was Dave. So there you go.
Okay.
Air Force One was number 3. And the American President was number 2.
Okay.
I'm not seeing Canadian Bacon listed on here at all. So.
How disappointing.
All right. Anything else you want to add before we close it out this month?
No, I think that's about it.
Yeah, as always, I had a really good time with this, but perhaps not as good of a time as I'm going to have next month for our Christmas special when we're bringing it back. You knew that we were going to bring it back. It's a made-for-TV Christmas. Once again, a made-for-TV Christmas.
We were discussing, and I suggested one movie that we will be talking about next month. So we're already well into planning for it.
I've noticed that there have already been a really large number of Christmas movies released. I feel like this year seems to have a lot of Christmas movies that are coming out.
You sent me the posters for 2 of them, which I believe both had
Elizabeth Hurley
in them, and I wanted to particularly talk about one called Christmas in Paradise, which stars Kelsey Grammer, Elizabeth Hurley, billed in this order across the top, and Billy Ray Cyrus.
There it is.
And as I said to you at the time, if you told me that there was going to be a Christmas movie and the first 2 stars were Kelsey Grammer and Elizabeth Hurley, and then you asked me to guess the third.
And then the other one...
I don't think I would have ever gotten it right.
And the other one is Christmas in the Caribbean. So Elizabeth Hurley's just vacationing. I mentioned this on the weekly show too. She's loving it. Spending her Christmases in...
Well, wasn't this just in the news where Mariah Carey was trying to secure the trademark for the title Queen of Christmas?
Yeah.
And they said that she couldn't get that. Presumably they meant Elizabeth Hurley was also in contention for it.
Could be, yeah.
And after the year we've lost one Queen Elizabeth, we have another. Queen Elizabeth Hurley of Christmas.
Yep. I'm all for it. I mean, not enough to actually watch either of these 2 movies that are coming out. But I'll stick with the 90s ones. Thank you. Maybe Elizabeth Hurley is in a 90s Christmas movie. I don't know. We should check into that.
It seems we're every year I'm surprised by how many people have been in a Christmas movie in the 90s made for television. So
I've also noticed that, like, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's I'm off the mark on this, but I feel like Christmas movies are sort of like horror movies where, you know, like you once you're kind of established in that genre, like you become that's like where you make most of your movies. Like, you know, you become a scream queen or whatever. You have these actors who are frequently in that genre. It's the same with Christmas movies. I feel like you have certain actors who they just get many times over to be in these Christmas movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking here. She's in Christmas in Paradise. Father Christmas is Back. So this is at least 3 that I'm seeing here that she's in. All right, cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for this month. Thank you so much for listening. You can send us your 90s memories to 90s@filmpulse.net, or you can DM us on Facebook or Twitter at 90spod. Also, if you get a moment, consider reviewing us on iTunes. That'd be great. Until next month, for Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson. This has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.